You were not judged today. You were sentenced. Before your mouth could form the first syllable, before your gestures could ask for passage, something ancient and merciless had already decided your worth. It wasn't a person who did it. It was the invisible machinery that governs the human animal. And at the center of this machinery, like a shadow that spans centuries, is Machiavelli. He didn't write to console. He wrote to reveal what no one dares to admit: men don't see the truth, they see signs. The world doesn't reward essence, it rewards appearance. And those who fail to master this silent alphabet are crushed by it. There is a microscopic instant, an interval smaller than the blink of an eye, in which the brain of the observer decides whether you are a threat, a resource, or disposable. In that interval, Machiavelli has been whispering since the 16th century that the multitude is governed by the eyes, not by reason. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few touch what you truly are. And if what you appear to be is weakness, you will not be ignored by chance, you will be hunted by logic. You've felt it before. That room where the air seems to close in on your shoulders. That meeting where less capable men advance as if they were the natural heirs to the space, while you remain stuck to the invisible baseboard of the room. That feeling that the doors don't close in front of you, but on you. Machiavelli would call this the price of naivete, believing that character speaks louder than form. He saw man as a theater of masks. The prince does not govern with what he is, he governs with what he appears to be. He who insists on showing himself naked, hoping that the world will admire his inner scars, confuses purity with power. And the world, which was not designed to reward hidden virtues, responds with contempt. There's something profoundly biological about it. When you enter an environment, you're not seen as an individual. You're processed as a standard. Drooping shoulders aren't read as tiredness, they're read as defeat. Eyes pleading for approval aren't read as politeness, they're read as submission. Nervous silences aren't read as humility, they're read as guilt. Every detail of your body speaks a language you never studied, but that everyone understands. Machiavelli realized that men don't hate poverty because of the lack of money, but because of the reflection it creates within them. Poverty isn't an empty bank account. It's a psychic odor. A sign that that individual has already been defeated by something greater. And human beings, superstitious by nature, flee from anything that reminds them of defeat as if it were contagious. They can't explain it, but they distance themselves. They don't rationalize, but they exclude. You can swear you don't care. You can repeat to yourself that authenticity is everything. You can dress your negligence as a virtue. But Machiavelli smiles at this kind of innocence. He knows that comfort is the anesthesia of the condemned. That the language of "that's just how I am" is the most polite form of surrender. The man who doesn't govern his own image is begging others to govern it for him. And they will. Cruelly. Because the human brain dislikes effort. It seeks shortcuts, and appearance is the ultimate shortcut. If you appear disorganized, the mind assumes you are incompetent. If you appear diminished, the mind concludes you are dangerous to associate with. Nobody wants to bear the weight of someone else's failure. Machiavelli warned that it is safer to be feared than loved. But before being feared, you need to be perceived as someone who can cause harm. And the man who appears poor, even when he is not, has lost that capacity. He becomes invisible to reverence and hypervisible to exploitation. Have you ever noticed how humiliation almost always finds the same bodies? How certain people are constantly interrupted, ignored, overshadowed, while others walk through the world as if the ground molds itself to their steps. It's not magic. It's psychological engineering. Their bodies don't ask permission. They announce ownership. And here lies the first secret that Machiavelli never explicitly wrote, but left implicit in every line: the world doesn't react to who you are, but to the narrative you project. Essence is only heard after form gains ground. Before that, you are nothing but noise. Perhaps something is starting to bother you now. Perhaps you're remembering how many times you tried to prove your worth with words, with effort, with sacrifice, and yet you were dismissed as being excessive. Perhaps you're beginning to suspect that the game wasn't rigged against you, but that you entered the game without armor. Machiavelli offered no consolation. He offered blades. And the first blade cuts through the illusion that the world is just. It is not. It is efficient. And efficiency has no empathy. It merely executes. If all this sounds disturbing, it's because it's meant to. Disturbance is the beginning of lucidity. But make no mistake, this is only the antechamber. You haven't yet seen the prince's mask. You haven't yet learned to project strength before possessing it. You haven't yet realized how much of yourself you're surrendering every time you walk through a door. And the question that Machiavelli would leave echoing now, like a whisper in the dark, is not whether you agree with this. It is whether you are willing to continue paying the price of ignoring it. The night after that first jolt of lucidity, you don't sleep like before. Something keeps hammering in the back of your mind, as if Machiavelli had left a blade buried among your thoughts. You start noticing things that were always there, but that previously seemed invisible. The way the clerk changes their tone of voice when someone well-dressed enters the room. The way colleagues subtly lean in to listen to a man who hasn't even finished his sentence, while their own words evaporate into thin air like useless vapor. It's not paranoia. It's belated reading of the code. Machiavelli would say that the most common mistake of modern man is believing he lives in a civilized world, when in reality he has merely traded the jungle for air-conditioned rooms. The instinct is the same. Only the choreography has changed. Instead of claws, there are contracts. Instead of roars, there are calculated silences. And at the center of this invisible dance is you, still wearing the emotional garb of someone asking permission to exist. You remember a specific day. An elevator. Doors closing. You and 3 other people. One of them enters, speaking loudly on the phone, complaining about meetings, decisions, how he needs to solve problems. No one knows who he is. But something in his posture, the cadence of his words, the lack of hurry, changes the geometry of that small space. Bodies shift to make way. Eyes recognize him as the center. You, right there beside him, with your projects on your mind and your entire history on your shoulders, don't even occupy the silence. Machiavelli would call this narrative control. Whoever controls the initial impression doesn't need to explain the rest. The man who enters apologizing has already accepted the role of an extra. The man who enters as if he's already late for something bigger forces the world to adapt to him. Perhaps you find yourself now in everyday situations that are beginning to hurt in a different way. In the bank queue, when someone approaches the manager by their first name and you realize that the distance between you isn't financial, it's symbolic. At family lunch, when your most arrogant uncle occupies the table with empty stories, while you, carrying defeats, lessons learned, and scars, feel there's no space to be heard. Machiavelli whispers that space isn't given. It's taken. The cruelest thing is realizing that you yourself are helping to build your own invisibility. You're always in a hurry to justify, to explain, to soften the blow. When you make a mistake, you rush to diminish yourself before anyone else does. When you succeed, you treat it as luck. You wear your biography as if it were a debt. That's not humility. It's choreographed self-sabotage. Machiavelli observed that men judge more with their eyes than with their hands. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few feel what you truly are. But you act as if the world has the time and inclination to dig down to your essence. It doesn't. The world schemes the surface and moves on. There's a scene that repeats itself every day, perhaps even this morning, and that you've never interpreted with the right lens. You enter a room and your shoulders slump a millimeter. It's not noticeable to you, but it is to those observing. You look at the floor before looking at the people. You laugh at something you didn't find funny. These are micro-signals, almost poetic in their subtlety, but devastating in the interpretation they provoke. Machiavelli wouldn't speak of body language. He would speak of hieroglyphs of power. You write an entire story with your body before uttering a word. And then there's the moment when the turning point happens, almost always too late. When you realize you've been left behind, that your idea has been repackaged by someone else and now belongs to them. You're not robbed. You're replaced. Because you didn't occupy the territory of perception. Someone else did it for you. Machiavelli knew that the man who doesn't seem capable of retaliation is always chosen as a scapegoat. Not because he is weak, but because he appears to be. When a crisis arrives, when the company needs someone to blame, when the group needs a symbolic sacrifice, the collective gaze turns to the one who already presented himself as disposable. You've felt this before. That meeting where, without fully understanding how, the responsibility fell entirely on you. And you accepted it. Because you had already been accepting it long before. Perhaps now you're beginning to realize that the problem was never just what they did to you, but the role you agreed to play. You believed that working hard in silence would be enough. That someone would notice. That someone would reward you. Machiavelli would never nurture that kind of hope. He would say that merit that is not visible is like a coin minted in an extinct language. No one recognizes it. No one exchanges it. And here comes the most uncomfortable part: you weren't deceived by bad people. You were deceived by a naive reading of human nature. You believed that others saw you as you see yourself. They don't. They only see the image you project. There's an almost imperceptible moment when this begins to change. Perhaps it's happening now. A subtle unease, as if the ground supporting your certainties were slightly tilted. You begin to suspect that the deepest poverty isn't the lack of money, but the lack of control over your own image. And this realization doesn't liberate. It hurts. Machiavelli wouldn't extend a hand to comfort you. He would silently ask you how many times you entered a room asking permission to exist. How many times you smiled to avoid rejection. How many times you wore the mask of innocence hoping the world would be kind in return. The mystery that now unfolds is simple and brutal: if you don't write your own narrative, someone else will write it for you. And that narrative will rarely be generous. But there's something you don't know yet. There's a technique to reverse this game before it even begins. A way to enter any space and bend the reading of the environment to your advantage. You haven't seen this mask yet. You haven't felt the true weight of its presence. But the door has already begun to open, even if you don't realize it. And that's where the real game begins. You begin to notice that it's not just your clothes or posture that reveal your position in the invisible game. It's the way you enter a room, how you occupy your chair, how you touch the table before speaking. Machiavelli saw these micro-gestures as signs of sovereignty or surrender. He knew that the human mind seeks anchors to decide who leads and who obeys, and these anchors are not logical, they are sensory. The man who moves as if he already has a right to the space conquers it even before asking for it. There's an everyday scene that goes unnoticed, but carries the entire code. You arrive at a new place and choose the most secluded chair, the one that seems least exposed. You protect yourself before being attacked. The other person's brain registers this as a confession of weakness. Machiavelli would understand that the first move always defines the framework of the interaction. Whoever hides declares themselves smaller, even if they don't realize it. And then there is silence. Not timid silence, but silence that weighs heavily. When you talk too much, you become predictable. When you over-explain, you expose yourself. Machiavelli's prince speaks little because he knows that each word creates a map of his mind for the enemy. The man who remains silent forces the other to fill the void with his own insecurities. Have you ever noticed how people rush to speak when you merely observe them? Have you felt how their discomfort grows when you offer no reaction? What would happen if you stopped demanding attention and started giving it only when you deem it necessary? From that point on, something changes in your perception. You understand that power is not aggression, it's restraint. It's not about dominating the other, it's about not letting yourself be dominated by the need to be accepted. Machiavelli wouldn't talk about self-esteem, he would talk about self-control. He would see in the man who restrains himself an inner sovereign, someone who doesn't surrender his impulses as bargaining chips. You start to notice how people are constantly testing boundaries. They interrupt sentences, laugh at the wrong moment, throw in small rudeness disguised as jokes. These are probes, like light touches on a wall to see if there are cracks. When you accept everything with an automatic smile, you reveal yourself as open territory. Machiavelli would say that the man who does not defend himself in the details will be invaded in the big moves. There's a silent shift when you begin to calmly return those tests. A steady gaze, a pause before responding, a simple continue said without submission. There's no explicit confrontation, but the atmosphere rearranges itself. The predator retreats because it hasn't found the easy ground it expected. It's at this point that you realize it was never about being loved, but about being indecipherable. But the game becomes even more complex when you understand that it's not enough to defend boundaries, you need to create expectation. Machiavelli understood the value of emotional scarcity. Those who are always available become commonplace. Those who only appear when they choose create magnetism. How many times have you offered too much, expecting recognition, and received only more tasks? How many times have you confused generosity with weakness? What would change if you withdrew your access with the same ease with which you grant it? There is an almost imperceptible form of authority that arises when you don't react within the expected time frame. The slightest delay, the interval between stimulus and response, breaks the other person's script. The other person's mind becomes disorganized for a moment, and in that moment you take center stage. Machiavelli would understand this as the art of delaying the game in order to rewrite it. You begin to see that the most corrosive poverty is not material, but the poverty of inner control. The man who does not govern his impulses becomes governable. He explains himself when he doesn't need to, apologizes when he hasn't erred, shrinks when he should remain. And the world, which does not respect emotional fragility, responds with contempt disguised as cordiality. There's a scene that repeats itself in almost everyone's life, but is rarely read clearly. A meeting, a casual conversation, someone makes a comment that cuts you like a blade. You laugh to lighten the mood, but something inside contracts. You've just taught the environment that it can be penetrated without cost. Machiavelli would see this as a symbolic defeat, too small to generate outrage, large enough to become a habit. And then the inevitable question arises: how many times have you accepted being diminished in order not to seem difficult? How many times have you sacrificed your inner self to preserve a false harmony? What do you really gain by always being the most understanding person in the room? Gradually, the fear changes form. It's no longer the fear of being rejected, but the fear of remaining irrelevant. You realize that invisibility isn't an accident. It's a pattern that repeats itself because you sustain it. Machiavelli would never offer comfort here. He would say that each man chooses daily whether he will be at the center or on the margins, even if he doesn't know it. You begin to experience subtle, almost secret changes in behavior. You speak less, observe more, occupy space without asking permission. It's not a theatrical transformation. It's an internal mutation that begins to reflect in your body. People can't explain it, but they start treating you with different care. The tone changes, questions arise, deference grows. Not because you've become someone else, but because you've stopped presenting yourself as the same person. And then the understanding deepens in a disconcerting way. You are not learning to manipulate others, you are unlearning how to sabotage yourself. Machiavelli did not want to create tyrants, he wanted to create lucid men. Men who do not confuse kindness with passivity nor humility with invisibility. When you realize this, something shatters inside you, like an old mirror. The image of who you believed yourself to be no longer fits with how the world begins to respond. And the final concern of the stage arises: if all this can change simply by how you conduct yourself, how many other doors have you kept closed because you never dared to turn the right key? There is a disturbing moment when you realize you are not only being observed, but classified. Not by a visible system, not by written rules, but by a collective intelligence that operates in silence. Machiavelli would understand this as the invisible court of appearances, a jury that forms even before you sit down at the table. He knew that modern man believes he has overcome instinct, when in reality he has only disguised it with education. You may have experienced something like this. You enter a store just to ask a price, and, before you can speak, you notice the salesperson close up like a safe. There's no hostility, just distance. Then, someone better dressed walks through the door and, as if by magic, the same salesperson transforms into a host. No words were spoken, but the sentence was pronounced. For Machiavelli, this everyday ritual is not a moral failing, it's brutal efficiency. There is data that rarely reaches the general public. Studies on behavior indicate that first impressions are formed in less than half a second, and that they are maintained even when confronted with contrary information. The human mind doesn't correct, it justifies. If you are perceived as irrelevant, every mistake will be amplified. If you are perceived as important, every failure will be reinterpreted as an accident. Machiavelli would write this as the tacit law of power perception precedes truth. There is a little discussed episode in modern history that illustrates this perfectly. During a financial crisis at a large European bank, Two executives made identical mistakes, but only one was publicly held accountable. The other was promoted months later. The difference wasn't in the numbers, but in the image each had cultivated over the years. One presented himself as a cog in the machine, the other as an architect. Machiavelli would say that the first wore the skin of disposability. You start noticing this in environments you never imagined. At parties, the person who gets listened to isn't the one with the best story, but the one who speaks as if their story already has value. In meetings, the one who sets the pace isn't the most prepared, but the least anxious. The world reacts to restraint with reverence. Anxiety, however understandable, sounds like a plea for pity. Perhaps you remember a colleague who seemed to do nothing extraordinary, but was always the first to be consulted. You wondered what he had that you didn't. Now you're beginning to realize he had narrative control. He didn't rush, he didn't compete for attention, he didn't beg for validation. He occupied the space as if it already belonged to him. Machiavelli would have smiled at the sight of this man, even if he had never read a line of The Prince. There is also the cruelest side effect of the system-learned self-deprecation. After years of being treated as invisible, you internalize the verdict. You start speaking more softly, downplaying your plans, presenting your dreams as jokes. Machiavelli would see this as the most efficient victory of power when the dominated begin to execute on themselves the sentence that was imposed upon them. An unlikely event often marks the beginning of a rupture. It's not a great triumph, but a small act of disobedience. You stop laughing when you don't find something funny. You hold eye contact for a second longer. You refuse a task you've always accepted out of fear. Nothing changes externally immediately, but something changes in the surrounding environment. The air seems denser, as if the atmosphere needs to recalculate its perception of you. Machiavelli wrote that men are quick to love, slow to respect, and instantaneous to despise. Contempt is born from what seems easy to crush. When you cease to seem easy, the math changes. It's not about becoming arrogant, but about becoming illegible. The illegible man cannot be immediately classified, and what cannot be classified is treated with caution. You begin to see the hidden theater in banal scenes. On public transport, those who sit as if they were temporary workers are pushed along by the human flow. Those who sit as if they were in their own room create an invisible protective field. In job interviews, those who beg for an opportunity surrender power before even beginning. Those who present themselves as an option force others to compete. There's a little-known story about a large technology company where candidates were evaluated not only on their resumes, but also on how they reacted to minor delays and glitches in the selection process. Those who demonstrated excessive anxiety were discarded, even if they were technically superior. The internal justification was simple: those who cannot govern themselves cannot govern projects. Machiavelli would have signed that memo without hesitation. You then realize that the most dangerous poverty isn't in your pocket, but in your existential attitude. It's the habit of over-explaining yourself, of offering yourself before being asked, of being grateful for not having been rejected. This behavior, repeated for years, sculpts a persona that the world learns to ignore. What reignites interest is not the promise of wealth, but the promise of repositioning. You don't need to change your entire life to change how people perceive you. You just need to interrupt the automatic script that put you where you are. Machiavelli wouldn't teach this as morality, but as survival. And as you begin to experience this disruption, something almost magical happens. The world responds. Not with applause, but with attention. Not with affection, but with space. And in this newly created space, you can finally move as someone who has ceased to be an extra in their own story. You no longer walk as you once did. Something invisible has shifted in your inner self, and the world begins to react with an almost imperceptible delay, as if it were still trying to decipher who you have become. Machiavelli would see this as the moment when the theater of appearances collapses and needs to be rewritten. When you alter the narrative you project, the environment enters a state of suspension. It hesitates, and in that interval, power is born. You notice it in the small scenes of everyday life, those that were never worthy of attention. The cashier at the supermarket now looks up at you before speaking. A colleague who always interrupted your sentence now waits. A stranger on the street slightly changes their route when passing you. These aren't grand victories. but they are signs that the code has been reprogrammed. The human animal senses something new, even if it doesn't know how to name it. But the game doesn't forgive naivete. There comes a point when the system reacts. When you stop presenting yourself as a victim, you also stop being predictable. And the unpredictable threatens the order. People who benefited from their former position begin to test limits more aggressively. It's no coincidence. Machiavelli would teach that power that shifts provokes automatic resistance. Those who profited from your subjugation feel the loss as a personal attack. Perhaps this happens in the environment you least expect. A friend who starts mocking your change. A family member who tries to bring you back to the comfortable version of who you were. A superior who increases the pressure as if trying to crush something that's slipping out of control. These aren't flaws in the process. They're proof that it works. You suddenly find yourself facing a silent choice to yield in order to restore the old harmony, or to sustain the tension and accept the discomfort of growing. Machiavelli wouldn't romanticize this moment. He would say that the peace offered by submission always exacts interest. In the short term, it seems like relief. In the long term, it becomes imprisonment. The upheaval doesn't come with applause. It comes with isolation. You start to notice that certain invitations cease, that some conversations change tone, that the familiarity of before is replaced by a cautious distance. It is at this point that many retreat. They confuse loss of access with loss of value. Machiavelli would warn that not every door that closes was an exit. Some were merely cages with a view. The rhythm of your life intensifies. Every gesture now carries intention. You no longer move to be accepted, but to occupy. You don't speak to be heard, but to mark your territory. And when you don't speak, the silence already communicates for you. This economy of energy creates a new field around you, a field that cannot be explained, but imposes itself. But there's a deeper, almost subterranean tension that begins to form. You feel the risk of going too far, of becoming cold, distant, perhaps even unrecognizable. The line between dominance and isolation is thin. Machiavelli knew this, and that's why he insisted on the mask. You don't change who you are. You change what the world sees. The danger lies in confusing the mask with the face. There's a particular night when everything seems about to crumble. A conversation where someone confronts you directly, as if trying to force you to adopt your new stance. You feel the old urge to justify yourself, to explain, to diminish yourself in order to preserve the connection. It's a final test, not given by the other person, but by yourself. And when you don't give in, when you remain whole in the discomfort, something breaks. Not outside, but inside. From then on, the fear shifts. Before, you feared rejection. Now you fear betraying yourself. And this new fear is more fertile, more constructive. It prevents you from returning to your old role, even when it would be easier. Machiavelli would see in this the birth of the inner sovereign, the one who doesn't need an audience to maintain himself. The environment around you begins to reorganize itself in an almost conspiratorial way. People you didn't know start to approach you. Opportunities that weren't on your radar begin to emerge, not as favors, but as invitations. You realize that the difference lies in the type of relationship you now establish. You are no longer someone who asks for space, but someone who creates contexts. But the suspense grows because you feel that all of this is still fragile. A poorly held mask falls. A poorly defended posture dissolves. The old version of you hasn't died. It's just sleeping. And it wakes up whenever you're distracted, whenever you seek approval where there is none. Machiavelli wouldn't say you're safe. He'd say you're at war with yourself. And that war doesn't end when the world starts respecting you, but when you stop needing it to. There's a final, almost palpable threshold approaching. A point where you'll stop merely reacting to dynamics and start deliberately shaping them. You haven't reached it yet, but you can already feel the presence of this unknown territory. It doesn't resemble wealth or fame. It resembles autonomy. And it is precisely there, when the old identity is still trying to pull him back and the new one has not yet fully solidified, that the story needs to move forward to its conclusion. There is a point in every transformation where knowledge ceases to be theory and becomes a choice. You have arrived here because something within you refused to remain in the same place. Machiavelli would not write this ending as a reward, but as a summons. He would say that now you can no longer pretend not to see. The world will continue to function as it always has, judging before listening, rewarding appearance before essence, obeying signs and not promises. The difference is that, from this moment on, you decide whether you will be crushed by this machine or whether you will learn to turn it to your advantage. Perhaps you are expecting a grand gesture, a theatrical change, but Machiavelli would never have trusted noisy revolutions. He believed in small, precise interventions, repeated until they became a defining characteristic. That is what now unfolds before you: a concrete, silent, and utterly practical path. Start with your body, because it speaks before your mind. When crossing any threshold, slow down. Not like someone who is tired, but like someone who doesn't need to rush. Hold eye contact for a second longer than would be comfortable. Not to intimidate, but to show that you are not avoiding the reading field. Feel as if you are occupying legitimate territory. If before you chose the corner, choose the center. These decisions don't change the world. They change the way the world reads you. Next, cultivate silence. Cut your words in half. Eliminate unsolicited explanations. Stop narrating your difficulties as if that would buy understanding. Machiavelli knew that the more you reveal, the more predictable you become. The man who speaks little becomes mysterious not through strategy, but through economy of energy. He does not waste his own presence. So, observe your reactions. Every time you feel the urge to justify yourself, to apologize for existing, to laugh to neutralize discomfort, pause. That interval is the crack through which the old identity tries to return. It is there that you choose. Either you repeat the script that brought you here, or you write a new line. It's not easy. It's not comfortable. But it is in this space that autonomy is born. Machiavelli would also insist that you treat your image as if it were a work tool. Not out of vanity, but out of respect for what you carry inside. Fix what is broken. Don't normalize cracks, dirt, neglect. Every neglected object is a message you send to yourself that you don't deserve better. External discipline reorganizes internal chaos. There is also the most delicate part: your human environment. You don't need to abandon anyone, but you need to understand that different contexts require different companions. When you are in areas of growth, walk with those who walk upright. The world judges you by the collective reflection. Machiavelli would warn that a prince is judged by the quality of those who surround him. As you apply these gestures, something begins to solidify. It's not arrogance, it's solidity. You no longer react to everything. You don't offer yourself to everyone. You don't explain yourself to just anyone. And this changes the texture of your relationships. People start listening to you more attentively, not because you've become someone else, but because you've stopped presenting yourself as disposable. There's a silent moment when you realize you're no longer waiting for validation to act. You act because you've decided to. That's the true sign that the prince's mask is no longer just a mask. It begins to merge with your face. And when that happens, you no longer need to convince the world of anything. It adjusts itself by inertia. Machiavelli would never say that this path brings happiness. He would say that it brings efficiency. But there is a strange serenity that arises from efficiency. The tranquility of not begging, of not explaining oneself, of not diminishing oneself. The tranquility of existing without apologizing. If you take away anything from this video, let it be this: the poverty that cost you the most wasn't financial. It was symbolic. It was how you presented yourself, how you moved, how you were silent, and how you talked too much. From today on, this doesn't need to be automatic anymore. Every door you walk through is a rehearsal. Every conversation is a training ground. Every silence is a choice. You don't need to be cruel. You need to be lucid. You don't need to dominate anyone. You need to stop giving in. If this content provoked you, made you rethink things, or brought you clarity, like this video. If you want, leave a comment telling us what impacted you the most, even if it's anonymously. And subscribe to the channel, because the next step in this journey is even more profound.